Great. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for your patience as I got through. And Michelle, I think I have until, is it 2:45 or 2:50 before we wrap?
We have until 2:50.
2:50. Okay. All right. Super. Feel free, folks, to post in the chat if you'd like. And Michelle, if you can send something to me privately or Michelle privately. She's our O staffer here. Um, and I don't know if we've got parents or students or some combination thereof. This is our first online orientation session, but really, really excited that you're able to join us today. I've got maybe about 25, 30 minutes or so of materials, and then we're going to I'll stop the recording and we'll take your questions. So my name again is David Lawrence. I'm the lead pre-health advisor at UC Santa Barbara. This coming academic year will be my fifth on the job. And this is our team right here that you can see on your screen. My colleague, Jessica Vasquez Arroyo, is currently on maternity leave. She'll be out for most of the fall quarter, but she's a great asset to our team. She's a local Santa Barbara gal. She grew up here, born and raised. First gen kid, did her undergrad at UCLA, came back to Santa Barbara prior to coming over to the UCSB pre-health team. She was working at UCSB admissions, so she brings a pretty, kind of diverse experience to her role here in pre-health advising. And for you real gunners out there, she's also one of the pre-law advisors. So if you're not sure, like maybe a doctor, maybe an attorney, Jessica would be a great resource for you. My name again is Dave Lawrence. I'm prior to coming to UCSB, my previous role in higher education, I was on faculty at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado. I would suspect there are some out-of-state folks. If you're from out of state, feel free to post into the chat where you're from. I usually, when I'm doing these presentations over in Ivy Theater, I ask for a show of hands for out-of-state folks. But if you want to just post if you're from out of state and you want to post that in the chat, that'd be great, so I can get a sense for where folks are coming from. Dr. Blaine in the upper right of your screen there is a retired pediatric dentist. He's really the brains behind the pre-health initiative at UC Santa Barbara. About 20 years ago or so, he got this whole enterprise off the ground and has been a volunteer his entire time. He's a retired pediatric dentist, but he was also on faculty and staff at UCLA's School of Dentistry, has a lot of deep connections with the healthcare providers here in town. Dentistry obviously was his profession, but he has deep ties with folks from all kind of the whole healthcare continuum throughout in town. Most first and second year students won't meet with Dr. Blaine, but he's a really, really great resource for our kids who are going to be in the application process in particular. Those three young ladies you see at the bottom of your screen there, those are our pre-health peer advisors. Ella Jade and Layla, and the left and right, respectively, are rising seniors in both pre-meds. Ella Jade's a biopsychology major. I suspect many of you are biopsychology majors or bio majors on this call. And Layla is a pre-med. Occasionally she pops over, and I don't think she's on this call. Is she somewhere in here? No, I don't see her. But she's currently studying for the MCAT over on probably the 7th or 8th floor of the library right now. And several times throughout the summer when we were doing our in-person orientations, she would come over, take a break from studying, and come over and talk to pre-health students. And then Vanessa in the middle there is a bio major, rising senior as well, and she is pre-PA. But those pre-health peer advisors are probably going to be your first points of contact. If you've got questions about schedule, planning, et cetera, maybe a scouting report on professors, that maybe is a little bit more nuanced than what you might see on Rate My Professor or something like that. They're going to be great resources with been there, done that cred. So make your pre-health advisors your friends, and I think you'll be well served. I know some of you may be familiar with the campus layout. Over here is Campbell Hall, which is one of the larger, if not the largest lecture hall on campus. We're about maybe 150 yards as the crow flies. I'm actually working from home today. I have a fractured ankle, and I'm trying to keep it elevated because I'm getting my stitches out hopefully on Thursday. But I'm typically in the office every day. oftentimes meeting with students. We do offer some drop-in stuff during the academic year, but I'm typically in the office every day, about 150 yards from Campbell Hall. There's a nice little Coral Tree Cafe, which is one of the more popular eateries on campus, and I'm just right across the little walkway from there on the second floor, 2105 North Hall is where the pre-health and pre-law advising offices are located. So what do we offer for students? Schedule planning, like I said, is a lot of what we do. Some of this stuff, particularly as you get a little bit more accustomed to registration windows and what you're going to be expected to take and when, it will become a little bit more routine. I completely understand that right now you may be a bit apprehensive about what awaits you and like, oh, I'm not really sure. We'll go over a sample schedule here in just a couple of slides to maybe take some of that apprehension and uncertainty out of the equation for you. But academic schedule planning, and that's what a lot of our pre-health peers do, particularly with first and second year students. I know a lot is kind of, you're drinking from a fire hose right now as far as the information that's being, kind of shotgunned to you right now. The game will slow down to include the registration process. So, just hang in there, what you're feeling right now, any kind of apprehension or anxiety that you may be feeling right now about the registration process, it's perfectly normal. You're in good hands with those staffers. It's one of the more competitive student jobs on campus. I actually recommend the job because it's such an enormous responsibility. I recommend to my pre-health students working, if they can, working as an O staffer during the summer because it's some great transferable skills that you'll build. And you're in good hands with your O staffers. We'll do some career counseling. There is a career services center on campus that will also help with that. We do some of that career counseling. A lot of times, particularly incoming first year students, they don't know what they don't know, and they don't even know how to connect to those resources that they're unsure that they may even, exist. If you're in that situation, you've already made your first connection with me. So you're welcome to reach out to me and or the peer advisors, even if we're not the place where, you can ultimately get your questions answered. We'll know who to connect you with so we can help you make those connections. And I think that's an important role that we recognize and that we fulfill for our students. Later on down the line, those last two bullets on this slide, working with students, I'm meeting, almost all day, every day right now. When I'm not doing new student orientation, I'm meeting with kids in the application cycle right now. They're getting ready to do interviews for med school, dental school, et cetera. We do that stuff throughout the spring, the winter and spring. We're working with students on their application essays, their personal statements, throughout the fall for their interviews. And then if you're fortunate enough, for example, to get multiple offers, we can talk about, some pros and cons of what programs you might want to consider. So we'll be there for the decision-making time as well. These are the careers that are health profession tracks that we advise on. Far and away, the largest student group that we advise on, and we'll talk numbers in a couple of slides from now, but far and away, the largest group that we advise on are the pre-med population. Every year, there's between 250 to 270 or so gauchos applying to med school. The second largest population is our pre-PA population, about 100 to 120 or so gaucho alumni applying to PA school every year. And then dentistry, I think, comes in a relatively distant third, about 50 to 60 or so gauchos applying to dental school. And like I said, in another couple of slides, we'll look at those numbers, a little bit more granular detail, what kind of GPAs those students are looking like, and where they're applying to. And we have all of this information. We really do try to be transparent about how our students are performing and at what levels they're performing. I met with a student this morning. She's like, oh my goodness, my chance of med school is totally toast. She's a rising senior. And I'm looking at her GPA. She's got a 3.75. I said, why do you think it's game over for you? She's like, well, I know I need a 4, like a 3.9 to be competitive for med school. I said, stop listening to whoever it is that is telling you that terrible information that is simply not borne out by the facts, right? So we'll look a little bit more at that. But these other, specialties are also things that we advise on. I was actually just before I got onto this call, I meant to get in here a little bit earlier, but I was talking with a pre-vet student who was a little bit panicked. We have about 10 to 15 or so gauchos who are applying to vet school every year as well. Nursing, you'll notice the asterisk on that nursing entry. There are a lot of kids. The reality is the barrier to entry for nursing is much, much lower than it is for medicine or PA. And there are a lot of kids. I did a Zoom series last summer, 4 weeks in a row, where I was able to drum up about 4 or 5 panelists. I think I did them on Wednesday afternoons throughout the month of August. Gauchos in Nursing was the series. And there were kids in there, gauchos, who had gotten their BSNs, maybe their masters in nursing, or were en route to DNPs, to become nurse practitioners. Maybe they were traveling nurses, there were nurse anesthetists, there were all kinds of, there's so many different kind of routes one can take in the nursing pathway. I had a student, after that series concluded, she said, I came to UCSB. This kid was a rising senior. She was going to graduate early. She was going to graduate in the winter of 25. And she said to me right before the fall quarter started, she said, I came to UCSB as a pre-med. I got completely bodied by OChem. And I thought my opportunities to work in the health professions was over. And she said, hearing from all those alumni who talked about their somewhat indirect paths, oftentimes, to the health professions was so inspirational. This student, who, like I said, since graduated, she wanted her legacy to be starting a nursing club. And in her next to last quarter at UCSB, she went through all the paperwork and the bureaucracy to get a formally UCSB sanctioned nursing club started. They have, all the governance paperwork, et cetera, filled out. They have a leadership team, and we have a formal Gauchos in Nursing pre-nursing club here on campus. So that's, the kind of stuff that I see relatively frequently, that makes my job so rewarding, and it gets me so excited about working with this particular population, is that there's an element of collegiality amongst all of my UCSB pre-L students. Sure, there are going to be some cutthroat gunners out there, that's inescapable, but overwhelmingly the students with whom I interact, they really, really do want to be collegial. They get, either intuitively or through my kind of, reiteration, they get the idea that karma keeps receipts and you want to pay it forward, right? I just had a conversation along those lines with a student just earlier this morning. So those are the health careers we advise on. Moving right along, core prereq courses. Generally in your first year, in the next slide, we're going to show a sample schedule. But in your first year, and you're going to talk about this afternoon with your O staffer, and again tomorrow, and in the morning, you're going to take general chemistry. In your first year, you'll probably also take a calc or a statistics class, maybe sometime in your first quarter or sometime in your first year at UCSB. I know there's a lot of bio majors, I'm sure, on this call. Somewhat, perhaps paradoxically, biology is a course you're not going to take. I, in fact, just posted on the UCSB sub and read it this morning. Biology is typically a course that you're going to wait until your sophomore year to take. If you have AP Bio, you may have the opportunity to take Intro Bio in the fall, but I would discourage that. And we can talk about that maybe a little bit more in the Q&A session. Organic chemistry, bio, they're going to happen in your sophomore year. The reality is your first 2 years are going to be a real proving ground, right? There is no official term to Weeder courses, right? That's somewhat of a colloquial term, but the reality is that Gen Chem and Intro Bio often have that end result. There's no question that the herd is thinned in the first 2 years, in no small measure due to the rigor associated with general chemistry and the intro bio sequence, as well as organic chemistry, which you'll take as a sophomore. When you do your physics, when you do your English, yeah, that's, there's a little bit more flexibility with that. So don't worry about that so much right now, particularly for the fall. Okay. So what might a fall 25 schedule look like? This is going to seem surprisingly simple to you, right? And a lot of you think, "Oh my goodness, that's going to be a layup." I would discourage you from that level of overconfidence. The truth of the matter is, you're going to work perhaps as hard. You'll be working harder than you ever have intellectually, academically in the fall. The 10-week quarter system is unlike anything you've ever experienced before. Even if you've done dual enrollment when you're in high school, and I know plenty of kids probably on this call have done that, the 10-week quarter system is going to come at you fast and furious. You're going to have a midterm in week 3. You're going to have multiple deadlines multiple times throughout the quarter. You're going to look up and say, my goodness, how did I get to December already? It feels like we just started in late September. That's the reality that you're going to encounter. Okay. Stand by just a minute. Okay, cool. So what it might look like, Gen Chem, right? You're going to put Chem 1A on your schedule. Make that the first course you add when you're able to register. You're going to put in your O staffer is going to talk about putting courses in your cart and all that other stuff. The mechanics of it, they're going to be unpacked for you after this meeting later on this afternoon when you're huddling up with your O staffers, right? Chem 1A should be the first course you add to your fall schedule. Maybe you add a math class. Some of this will be dependent upon what you have with respect to dual enrollment or AP coursework. Whether it's Math 34A or maybe this or 3A or the second in the series, depending upon what you've taken for dual enrollment or AP. And then take a GE, right? It really is that simple. My goodness, 3 courses, that is just so laid back. I'm going to have time out of mind. I can assure you, you will not. You will be hustling and scraping, keeping up with the coursework that will be in front of you is not going to be, if it turns out to be just a walk in the park, that's fantastic. That's great for you. And I think that augurs really, really well for your success down the line. But you would be the exception, not the rule, if that is your reality, that this is something that you can just sleepwalk through. The overwhelming majority of students have to hustle to do well, to excel academically. And it's going to come at a degree of effort. Oftentimes, the level of effort is going to be proportional to the outcome. And I know this is going to come down the road, and we'll probably revisit this during the Q&A session. But one thing I do want to say, and your O staffers will probably reiterate this, because I know when I met with them back in the spring, I emphasized it to them. If you have a score of 3 or higher on your Calc AB or on your AP Stats, do not take Math 34A for if you have Calc AB, for example. Do not take Math 3A if you have a score of 3 or higher on your Calc AB. If you have a 3 or higher on BC, maybe you go directly into linear algebra, Math 4A, right? Maybe you just don't even take a math class. That's also an option. One of the things I want to emphasize is that you ought not take classes at UCSB, particularly in the fall, for which you will earn no units. If you have a 3 or higher on your AP Stats and you decide to register for PSTAT 5A or PSTAT 5LS, and you get an A in that class, you will not earn any units because you will have already been awarded credit for it by virtue of your AP score. So please don't take, it's called duplicate matriculation. Don't duplicate anything for which you will have already earned units through AP or dual enrollment. Okay, we'll probably revisit that, I suspect. If past is prologue, this always becomes a question that we unpack in greater detail during the Q&A session. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. These are courses that are going to be awaiting you as you move into the upper division sequence, your biochemistry, micro, genetics, etc. Some career paths, like perhaps pharmacy. They may want you to take an economic class. Maybe they want you to take a public speaking class, right? But these are all courses that you need not concern yourself with now. These are things that you can maybe, as you get closer to application windows, you're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive yourself, your own due diligence. What do I need to take as far as prereqs go that will make me a competitive candidate when the application time rolls around? Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on these. These are not classes that you need to concern yourself with, particularly in the fall of your freshman year. Okay. There are a lot of other things. I'm just going to roll all these out. There are a lot of other things besides grades. Metrics are probably the single most important thing for a competitive candidate, whether it's PA, Dent, Vet, Med, etc. How you perform academically and what you do in those board scores, MCAT, for example, for pre-meds, DAT for pre-dental students, etc. That's your metrics picture, but there are other things that you need to do in order to be a competitive candidate. It won't matter, for example, if you're a 4.0 student and a 100th percentile MCAT score, if you have nothing in the way of extracurriculars, you have no clinical experiences, your application to med school is dead on arrival if you don't have clinical experiences and a lot of these other kind of leadership and non-clinical opportunities. Again, these are not things. These are just to kind of, something for you to tuck away in the back of your head. These are things that are down the road for you. These aren't things that we would maybe that we would expect you to get involved in your freshman year, with this one exception of student orgs. The day before classes start, there is going to be a pre-health kickoff meeting, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to get, made aware of those sorts of announcements. There'll be a pre-health kickoff meeting and the day before classes start. So I think the first day of instruction is September 26th. So that Wednesday before classes start, we'll do a pre-health kickoff meeting. I'll be there to reintroduce myself, and the pre-health peers will also be there. Also in attendance will be a lot of representatives from student orgs on campus, and I'll ask them to give a 60-second elevator pitch to incoming first-year students and transfer students so that you can get a little bit of a sense for the types of organizations that are offered on campus and what communities you might want to connect yourself to. Those are great opportunities to build a professional and a social network, a peer network, relatively early. So student orgs are probably the only thing I would encourage you to, give serious consideration to in the fall of your freshman year. A lot of these other things can wait. There's plenty of time to get them added. Okay, where am I? I'm about 25-ish minutes in. So we're going to run through some FAQs. Like I said, I normally, if we were in person in Ivy Theater, I ask for a show of hands to get a sense for majors in the audience. Most of the students I would suspect are biology majors, and a frequently asked question I get is, do I have to major in bio in order to go to med school or dental school or any of these other programs? And the short answer is no, you don't. Those schools are not concerned with what your major is. Every year, there are econ majors. There are biopsychology, psych and brain. There's one or two comp sci, English, philosophy, history, feminist studies majors that are successful in their application candidacies. Not an awful lot, and for reasons that I think should be obvious. You see this, and y'all are smart, this is a Venn diagram, right? As one might imagine, the biology major and the pre-med or pre-dent or pre-vet prerequisites, they're almost two completely overlapping circles. If you want to go to medical school or dental school, and you also really love reading and writing and want to be an English major, great, I love it. You're a person after my own heart. But as you might imagine, there's no overlap between an English or a philosophy major and the pre-med prerequisites. So the lift gets heavier. You're taking a lot of classes outside of your major requirements. So, but again, that by no means suggests that you have no shot. As long as you take those prerequisite classes, you demonstrate a level of academic excellence, you're going to be just just fine, right? In fact, sometimes it can make you a more kind of um, I won't say unique, but maybe perhaps a more compelling candidate is if you have an interesting backstory. Like, one of my really strong candidates next cycle was a psych and brain sciences major, double majoring in music. She just graduated this past spring. She's applying to med school next year. And she is an accomplished cellist, has been playing the cello since she was about 4. And I went to her senior recital. She started a nonprofit on campus where she and a handful of other friends would go to memory care facilities and play string quartets for in retirement homes and memory care facilities. And she's gonna have an amazing uh, application when it rolls around. Again, a somewhat unconventional educational background, but she excelled in her prerequisite courses, and she's going to have a heck of a story when the time comes, right? Okay. This is somewhat of a facetious question. Are you the only source, Dave? Are you the keeper of the gatekeeper, to all things pre-health related? No, not by any stretch, right? And I talked about our team and what resources you have, and there's great, pre-health clubs on campus as well. I'm a middle-aged guy, so I have a rather, let's just say, complicated relationship with social media. Um, the truth of the matter is, my social media rant here. You're seeing on social media, you are seeing curated versions of people's best selves. I have yet to meet not just a pre-med, but any student who says to me, "My goodness, those 2 hours I spent doom scrolling Reddit or Snap Face or whatever, um, that was time well spent. I can't wait to do that again tomorrow." Invariably, students who cyberloaf and they go down some rabbit hole on some social media platform. And there are social platforms that are specifically tailored. It seems like, maybe I'm being a bit cynical, but they're specifically tailored toward preying on the insecurities of pre-health students. Be wary of those. Be wary of those sites. There are trolls that are out there, and they don't have your best interests. They're not your friends. There are some good information that can be sourced, good data that can be sourced from some of those sites. I have an anonymous account on Reddit. I don't post anonymously. When I created my account, I had no idea what I was doing. It's like Radiant Molasses or something like that on the UCSB sub, which is where I typically post. I always disclose that, hey, pre-health advisor here, just for the record. So I'm not trolling anyone or anonymously posting. But be wary uh, of the information that you glean from some of these sites. I've seen some really, really bad info disseminated through even the UCSB sub on Reddit. When I do see that, and I think it's appropriate, I'll weigh in and try to do a course correct. In fact, I just did that this morning with respect to MCDB 1A, the first in the intro biosequence. I'll chime in with a counterpoint, but just be wary of the Reddit and other social platforms. Okay, now I talked about prerequisite or extracurriculars a few minutes ago, and I know a lot of you are yeah me. I got the schedule. Yeah, okay. That's going to be a cakewalk for me. I know how I am. So just level with me, Dave. What can I do right now, just between us girls, right? Well, I've got your answer in 3 parts. The first, I need you to get good grades, right? I said earlier, and I stand by it, that metrics, i.e., your GPA, is one of, if not the most important element of your application. And so you really, really do want to excel academically, right? Second piece of this 3-part answer is get yourself some good grades, right? It really, um, you are here at UCSB for a reason. Nobody accidentally, you didn't sneak under any wires and like, oh my goodness, nobody's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, I'm sorry, there's been a terrible mistake. You don't belong here. It was Santa Barbara Basket Weaving University that you should have been admitted to, not us, right? That will never happen. Um, And we'll look at the GPA stuff here in the next couple of slides, but you really do need to buckle down. And then that last thing, get good grades. It's so much easier if you excel, particularly in the fall and winter of your freshman year. Then you can start adding on to things. Maybe it's a faster pace that you'll work on. Maybe you're going to add to your extracurricular menu, your palette, right? Um, it's so much easier to do that than to take too much on out of overconfidence or for any reason for that matter. And then you wind up taking too much on from the jump. Things go sideways for you in the fall and or winter quarters, and then you've got to you've got some making up to do, right? It's possible. It's always possible. I've seen kids who've been tremendous come from behind stories, but the lift just gets heavier. And to the extent that you can avoid having to do some heavy lifting and damage control with your GPA, you'll be well served. You've really got one job. Don't be like me. My wife took this when I was really focused on my interior carpentry, and you've got one job, right? Make sure you do it right, excel academically, and a lot of the other stuff. The game will slow down once you're excelling academically, and you'll be able almost intuitively to kind of pick up these other things that will eventually someday make you a competitive candidate. Now, having said all that, this is your first QR code. Um, Having said all that, I'm hoping now that I think about this, I want to make sure that this QR code, it was working as of Friday, but I just want to make sure that this is taking me to the right place. Let's see, drum roll. Yes, the ultimate UCSB pre-med master doc for all the gunners and everyone else taking these classes from a UCSB pre-med to you. The student who wrote this just graduated last spring. It's interesting, actually. I was just talking about social media platforms a few minutes ago. The first time I actually posted in any kind of lively exchange on the UCSB sub was when a student, I was kind of a lurker for a long time. And one day I saw in a thread, hey, I'm thinking about writing a how-to guide for incoming pre-meds. Is anyone interested in something like that? And people just piled, oh, that sounds great. Fantastic. I'd love to see it, blah, blah, blah. And about 10 days or so later, this document that is linked to in this QR code emerged. And while this whole kind of conversation was unfolding, I figured this is probably my chance to weigh in, let them know this OP, let them know that the adults were watching. And I said, yes, pre-health advisor here. I'd really like to see this doc that you're considering sourcing or compiling as well. For about 2.5 years, and about 10 days later, this document showed up. It is an absolute goldmine of information. Like I said, this woman just graduated this past spring. It sets an enormously high bar. She graduated with highest honors, 99th percentile MCAT. She's going to be an incredible applicant when that time comes. She's not applying yet. She'll apply next cycle. But there is just so much good information. There's no trolling or any kind of airing of grievances that goes on. This is just really, really good information. As I said, it's anecdotal, it's N of one, it's one person's experiences and perspectives. But there's some great, I won't call them hacks, but it's the different things that she did that set herself up for success. It sets a very, very high bar. Some may say an impossibly high bar, but if indeed you want to succeed in this endeavor, this, is one person's path to that end. So check that out and read it again, bookmark it, etc. Okay, so how are we doing? That's another frequently asked question. If you came to the open house back in April, you may have seen this. These are the latest version. And Michael, by the way, I see your question in the chat. I'll get to it when we do the Q&A. And I stopped the recording. Just so you know, that number right here. This is to break down. This is a little bit of. I know it's a lot of numbers going on in this chart here, but 263 kids who applied to med school out of UCSB in that particular cycle. These kids actually just finished their first year at med school. 130 out of these 263, so about 49.5-ish%, about, roughly 2 points above the national average, which is a really, really remarkable really remarkable accomplishment. And all but four out of these 130 wound up actually matriculating to med school. So these kids just completed their first year. They started in the fall of 24 at med school. You can see what their average GPAs look like here. The mean GPAs, BCPM stands for biochem, physics, math. That's their science GPA. As I said, you don't need to be a 4.0 student to have a shot at med school. This is the accepted column, right? AO stands for all other, and the cumulative GPA right there, again, lower than the national average. So you don't get any grade inflation by virtue of being a UCSB student. You make up for that ground, though, over here in the MCAT, right? You can see a marked higher average or mean score for the MCAT relative to the national average for students who are accepted into med school, this particular application cycle. I think this says several things. One, when you see this kind of the GPA and the MCAT score, it attests to the fact that your curriculum at UCSB does a very good job at preparing you for this all-important exam. And we'll look at some other, like DAT in the next slide or 2 slides from now for dental schools. Likewise, same kind of thing. That we do so well, even though we're below the national average for GPA, also I think attests to the regard that professional schools have for the curriculum at UCSB. They know that students at UCSB are putting in their time and they're working really hard to earn the grades that they get. And so I think the reputation that UCSB applicants have goes before them. And it's going to pay off in the end for these come application time. Just to give you a sense, I've often heard from students, I'm often asked at open houses, hey, you don't have a med school, a PA school, a dental school, et cetera, at UCSB. Does that mean that I'm at a disadvantage come application season? And I argue no. I think that slide previous attests to the fact that you're not disadvantaged. I have asked my counterparts at UCLA, at UCSD, at UC Davis, what their numbers are. I believe in being transparent. I share that information throughout the application cycle, how we are doing, how we are progressing. I've asked my counterparts, hey, how do your students do? The only UC who's replied to me with that information was UC Riverside, and their response was, we don't divulge that information. So I make certain inferences from those kinds of responses or lack thereof. But this is, I think, a big thing as well. That same application cycle where UCSB had 263 kids applying to med school, there were 1,200 applicants coming out of UCLA alone. What, 4.5x the number of UCSB or UCLA applicants relative to UCSB applicants. So when I talked at the top of my presentation about the collegial mentality, that I believe our UCSB applicants and pre-health students manifest, I think the size of much smaller population that we have is a significantly contributing factor to that. You see at Berkeley and San Diego, those two combined are about 1,300 schools. Again, there was about 50,000 in this particular application cycle. There were about 50,000 applicants out of nationwide. And about 5% of that nationwide application pool came from these 3 schools alone. So again, you make whatever inferences you will from them, but I like the fact that we have a smaller population of applicants. Davis has 500, not quite 2x the size that we do. USC has a pretty, good number of pre-meds down there as well, right? So just to give you some sense of scale. If you're not an MD, I don't mean to to neglect you. All of this information, this is just a screenshot, by the way, from our webpage, and I'll give you a link to that here momentarily. But you can see down here, this column, you can see the UCSB acceptance rate for each of these programs. This is for osteopathic medicine, dentistry, PA. These are all the different application systems. If you go to our homepage, these are blue. They actually link to Google Sheets where you can get more granular information about this sort of stuff. Look at this UCSB acceptance rate relative to the national average. I mean, 2 years ago, there were 45 kids who applied to dental school out of UCSB. 37 out of those 45 are admitted. That's the acceptance rate. What is that? Like 24, 23 points-ish above the national average? That's astonishing. And they're going to great programs. If you click on that link, for example, on our homepage, you'll see the GPA numbers for the UCSB applicants, and then there's two tabs at each one of these things. There's two tabs. And then the second tab, it'll tell you where UCSB kids are applying, where they're getting accepted, and where they're actually matriculating to, right? UCSF, I think we had 5 or 6 kids. The application numbers aren't finalized for this most recent application pool, but I believe we have 5 or 6 kids, each of whom I worked with in depth, as did Jessica, as did Dr. Blaine. We have 5 or 6 kids out of about maybe, there's roughly 50 kids in this most recent pool of applicants for dentistry. 5 or 6 kids who are starting at UCSF this month for their dental school. So great program. A lot of kids wind up at UCLA, USC. I actually do in the winter quarter, I do Zoom sessions with successful applicants so the kids who are getting ready to apply can have kind of the inside, information from students who've gone before them and have met with an awful lot of success. So we try to keep our cards on the table all the time. But again, all of this information you'll find on our website. Okay, speaking of websites, let me close that out because I want to make sure that you can get to the upper right there. That screen or that QR code will take you to that webpage where like I said, I was just doing screenshots. If you scroll down, you'll see all that information that's there. Also on our webpage is like I'm trying to kind of crowdsource an alumni group. One of my top applicants for med school this cycle just got an invitation to interview at University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine in August. And as it happens, we have a gaucho who is headed there next week. And I was able to connect those two to one another. And this one woman is going to give this applicant some, like, these are my experiences when I interviewed there. And I've known students who have done, even alumni, who've done mock interviews. There may be dental school, PA school, med school students, current, who will do mock interviews. You've got an interview at UCLA or at UCSF or at Case Western. I'll do a mock interview with you that replicates the successful interview I had, and I'll give you pointers as to how to excel, right? So that kind of information I think is really helpful. That's the collegiality that I've referred to repeatedly over the course of my talk here. Last thing I mentioned, don't duplicate matriculation repeat courses for which you've earned credit. This is the second most important thing I want you to take away from our conversation today. Get on the pre-health listserv. I send announcements out. I send sometimes clinicians in town know that I have a stable of about hundreds, several hundred, really, really, really good, smart, conscientious pre-health students on my listserv. There's about 5,500 folks on my listserv. A lot of them are alumni. A lot of them just like to keep getting my emails and stay connected to kind of get a sense for how things are continuing to grow here at UCSB. So get on our listserv, please. When we wrap this call, I hope to go back to that link, and maybe there's going to be about 49 or so new names that I can put on the listserv. I'll also, on that listserv announcements that I send out later in September, I'll be providing you information about the pre-health kickoff meeting, so you can kind of stay attuned to what's going on in the pre-health community here on campus. So last little story before we take questions. That kid right there, Natalie Chachadi, just graduated in spring of 24. And right around that same time, she was applying to med school. She was admitted to multiple programs. 3 weeks ago, this past Sunday, my wife and I watched her white coat ceremony remotely there in Case Western Reserve University, where she's attending med school along with 2 other gauchos. And she also, Natalie, worked for me for 2 years as a pre-health peer advisor. So maybe someday you can be a Natalie Chachadi and perhaps even work in the pre-health office or get in touch with us. Forming relationships with us is a really important part. I want you to brown nose. We don't write, I only write recommendation letters for kids who work for me. But I do think we have a lot of valuable information that we can impart to students. So be a Nat, and hopefully you'll have the same kind of success that she's going to enjoy. She'll be in, probably getting ready to start a residency when you all are getting ready to graduate, but that's a great thing. And I'm delighted for students like Nat. Okay, I'm gonna stop the share. I'm gonna stop the recording and questions. I'm gonna start taking questions from students at this point. Stop.